Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, here at my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for Volume 12, which is the fourth book in the Alicization arc, and this one is called Alicization Rising. As you can see there, it is in fact Volume 12. There's the kind of spine of the book. The cover I think is kind of weird this time out in that it's obviously Kirito, but the two girls here are, when you really come out of the book, they're two fairly random characters, I think. In that, honestly, right now, I don't really remember the two characters' names, but the idea is that they end up being like two Integrity Knights that kind of became Integrity Knights by kind of very different methods, and they're kind of these two like assassin girls. But they're really not in the book that long, so I really don't get why they are the cover characters. I think there is an Integrity Knight from the book that probably should have been on the cover, but it definitely wasn't these two characters. But you know, that is the cover itself. On the back we have a kind of chibi version of the Cardinal and our usual kind of description. Very briefly, I'll just read the description here. After a brief respite, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh set off again to climb the central cathedral. But the powerful Integrity Knights are not about to let them reach the top. Meanwhile, Kirito has learned the dark history of the underworld and the true stakes of the battle they're fighting, and every step towards Alice brings him closer to an impossible decision. And then, just before we get into actually talking about it, really quickly we'll go through the color pages. So there's a kind of clean version of the cover. And then we get into some of the more story-focused pages. So these are basically the various fights that happen in the book. Integrity Knight 7 versus Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Integrity Knight 2, who's the character I feel should probably be on the cover, versus Kirito, with some assistance from Yu-Gi-Oh! And then this happens right at the end of the book, which is Alice, who is Integrity Knight 31, against Kirito. And there is the central cathedral as our kind of main location that the book takes place in. So basically the structure of this book is in kind of two parts. One is finishing off the origin story for the Cardinal, the origin story for Quinella, and basically more about what the underworld actually is right now. It also serves the purpose for the overall arc and story of giving us, I suppose, more understanding about like what is the story beyond that. In the real world, Kirito is just in this place to recover from his injury. And what they're really getting at here is that Kirito, because of the person that he is and because of how he feels about kind of VR games, he doesn't consider the NPCs as just NPCs. He actually cares about them. And in this case, knowing that every person in the game is a Fluxlight, he and is kind of this kind of really intelligent AI, he actually cares about the people in the game because fundamentally they may not have physical bodies, but in terms of how their functions work as a being, they are real in that way. So he does consider them all to be that way, and the friendships that he's forming here, I suppose to him, are just as important as those ones outside. So from his perspective, of course, one aspect that he wants to solve here is also to just get the people he cares about out and kind of keep their Fluxlight active in the real world. But as we get really explored in that first section of the story with the Cardinal, what's happening in the game is that the game is sort of reaching this sort of an end state. They don't really establish that like it's programmed to be this way. But what we're losing track of a little bit, I suppose, in the last few volumes is that there is this whole dark territory area. That we've been so entrenched with the whole Integrity Knights things, what's happened to Alice, and Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's quest to kind of get her back from, you know, the Axiom Church, that we've forgotten that the Axiom Church exists to kind of fight the darkness in a way. And what are they? They are the goblins and the other kind of monsters of this world. And they basically set up this idea that very, very soon the forces of darkness are going to attack, and as far as the Cardinal is concerned, the Axiom Church is not strong enough to be able to defeat the amount of kind of firepower that the darkness has. And a lot of that is because of the way Quinella has ruled the kind of good side of the world, in that there are only 31 Integrity Knights, that is not enough to, you know, fight back. And because of the way they have ruled over the good parts of the world, no one else is anywhere near their level as such. And it's only the tournament every year that really brings a new Integrity Knight back into play. So the core, come the end of the Quinella Cardinal story, is that the Cardinal sees the only way to really deal with Quinella is to basically kind of erase the game, full stop. Just bring the game to a full end, erase everything that's present in it, and that's the way to stop everything from happening, which is, I suppose, the tragic death of everyone within the game. Rather, to stop that, just, you know, kill everyone, like destroy everyone's kind of you know, light cube, basically, that their Fluct Light is in. That's her solution to the problem. Whereas Kirito obviously makes the decision that, like, he's going to help the Cardinal by doing what the Cardinal needs to do to get the advantage. But he wants to do it in a way that won't lead to the destruction of the entire world. Because part of the deal he makes with the Cardinal is that he will help her to do what is required, but she has offered him that she will make it so that 10 light cubes, Fluct Lights of his choosing, will be saved from this purge. So effectively, 10 people from the underworld he will save, and they'll be, once he gets back into the real world, their light cubes, he will have them, or access to them, and I suppose the idea would be that they can still exist as AIs. Because we know, obviously, Yui is effectively like an AI daughter to him, so he cares about these people in that way. So the likes of Yu-Gi-Oh! And even the Cardinal here, he would want to, you know, keep them alive. So that's kind of the idea we have, I suppose, coming out of this. Because the other things I set up is that, like, Quinella, the end of the last volume was all about how powerful she is. This is what she did. She got all of the system commands of the game and took control that way. And the big reveal was that she managed to create a system command that basically allowed her to alter life forces in the game, which is why a lot of the Integrity Knights, it's why her and other characters can live to be older than it would expect, given that it's basically a simulation of human life. This one gets a lot more in-depth into, like, the specifics of what happened, in that she did make 2 mistakes, because of course this is someone who encountered all the power of the world, but doesn't have any idea that it's based in, like, kind of computer kind of talk. So the mistake she made was that she kind of fused her own Fluct Light with the Cardinal system, which basically had the adverse effect of forcing her to kind of have the same ideals as the Cardinal system, and that is kind of controlling the entire world in a way and making it so that errors are solved, but they both kind of have an influence on each other. So, like, her negative influence and want for power means that the error kind of solution of the Cardinal, which is usually just a kind of a thing that stops errors from happening in the world, means that, you know, it basically, they kind of say, like, it leads to the formation of the Axiom Church as a kind of way to keep all of this in play. The problem that happens here is that eventually she's alive for so long that her Fluct Light fills up. We know that there is a kind of there's a defined amount of space with someone's Fluct Light. We know there's a lifespan, but we know there's also a certain amount of space as well. So she fills that up. She managed to find this girl who has a very high authority level in the game, and so decides to basically make a complete transfer of herself onto this person, and then once she's freed up space in her own body, kind of take back a lot of what she needs. And obviously it's very delicate stuff, because you're dealing with memories, Fluct Light, effectively a person's soul and what is stored within their soul. And the mistake that happens here is that when she creates the copy in this girl, there is a moment when there are 2 godlike beings in the world. And we know, I think, from one of the earlier volumes, when they were explaining to Asuna on the ocean turtle, that what happens when you create a copy of a Fluct Light is that they both suffer because, especially the copy suffers because they're 2 things that are the exact same, and they question their existence so much that it causes issues with the Fluct Light. That happens here, but because the Cardinal system is in play, both basically act immediately under the Cardinal system to eliminate the other. And what happens here is that the new character, who is revealed to be Cardinal, this character here, who's the little girl, they more or less establish that her personality is completely like taken away from her here. This is just a body that the cardinal system now kind of inhabits, and it has a sort of personality that may be sort of an aspect of Quinella's personality, but may also be just the girl's personality as well. She makes the first move, and it's effectively this giant admin, system administrator kind of battle. They use system commands against each other, and nothing's really working. And eventually the situation that happens is that Quinella forces a situation where they can't use commands and actually have a fight with weapons. But because Cardinal is new in her little body and not used to it, she loses that fight and has to escape to the Great Library, which she manages to hide out in because she basically separates that from everything else, so that she can leave the Great Library and go to wherever she wants to, but there's no door for Quinella to get to this place because she doesn't know where it is now that it's been separated. So this is why the Great Library is this kind of like safe house for the start, and why this conversation can even happen. And it just sets up the idea that basically the only way to really defeat Quinella, if they ever encounter her, is for Cardinal to find some way to activate system commands kind of secretly on Quinella, and that is that she gives Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito, before they head out on their mission, these two kind of daggers. And the idea of these daggers is that they don't do any damage to anyone, but if you stab someone with them, it basically forms this connection between Cardinal and with the person who was stabbed. So this is how they'll get Alice back, and it's also how they'll defeat Quinella. When she's stabbed, it will allow Cardinal to do all the system commands she needs to, but with Alice, it will allow them to connect the Cardinal to Alice and reverse the synthesis process, which has eliminated Alice's kind of personality. And they do explain that in this book as well, like what the Integrity Knights are. They explain who certain ones of them are as well, and just the idea that this is a manipulation of those people's Fluctlights. It's this idea of like it's the kind of, what do they call it, like a piety cube or something like that module. Anyway, the pink thing that we saw with the Integrity Knight from the last volume that kind of came out of his head when they mentioned his mother, that is the thing that is basically causing their personality to be blocked, and this kind of loyalty personality of the character to come into play. And the idea is that is kind of implanted like on someone's most like important memory, and the only way to get around it is to basically perform like a reverse synthesis ritual when you've kind of revived someone's memory of their kind of most kind of important memory. So for the Integrity Knight in the last book, it was his mother, and then for other characters, there's obviously going to be other different people. So obviously the big setup here is like for Alice, what is her most important memory that's really going to spark something with her? Immediately you'd think it must be some sort of a scene with Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, but there doesn't seem to be that big of a reaction when they meet each other. It didn't happen when Alice was the one to take them to Central in the first place, and it doesn't happen at the end here in their kind of little fight that they have. So what is the key thing with Alice? So that's the core of the start of the book. There's a lot more detail in like the first, like basically the first 80 pages or so of this book are just one conversation with the Cardinal, and the only real distinction is that it goes from being Cardinal talking to Kirito, and then Yu-Gi-Oh later comes in, so it becomes less focused on talking about the real world stuff and being more like, we still can't reveal any of this to Yu-Gi-Oh. The other result here is that the Cardinal teaches them how to activate the other power levels of their swords, because they establish here that if you have a divine weapon like both Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito have, there are two different forms of power that your weapon can have, and it's something they've encountered with the other Integrity Knights, and that is basically enhance armament and then I think release sword. I think that are the gist of what the two different powers are. Enhance armament is basically the sword and an aspect of what that sword kind of used to be, creating a power for that sword. So Yu-Gi-Oh's sword, the Blue Rose sword, it activates kind of like this ice field kind of scenario where he can freeze up the ground, and then these blue thorns of ice basically come out and hurt people. Kirito's enhanced armament is that because his sword is made from the Gigas tree, it basically spawns kind of darkness branches of the Gigas tree to add like darkness power and like kind of spear people. And there's other things like that. One of the other Integrity Knights has a sword where it fires out these kind of laser beams, basically, that ultimately lead to her being defeated by a mirror. But, you know, the idea of like laser beams like that. And then there's also the release command, which she specifically says that like you can do, but I can't teach it to you just yet. But you'll probably see along the way kind of how to and why you can and can't use this technique. Basically, they say that once you use the release command of your sword, it's the most powerful form of your sword, but it's also a form that will damage you because it has so much power that you can't necessarily control exactly who is affected by it. So that's a big thing for both characters, in that we don't see Kirito or Yu-Gi-Oh use that technique yet, but we do see some of the other characters use it, in that the second Integrity Knight uses it. She's the one with the kind of laser beam basic version of her sword. The release power is that basically multiple laser beams just fire all over the place. It's like impossible to avoid almost. And she ends up like obviously really badly injuring herself while trying to take down Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito with it. So that's going to be a cool setup. And it's really cool because it feels in a way a little bit like Bleach, with the whole idea of the Zanpakuto and the different release commands of just like the Shikai. That there's the sword itself. The Shikai activates one ability of the sword, which is basic, and it just alters the way the sword looks. And then the Bankai version is just this crazy aspect of the sword that does like really insane things. And it feels like that, and I think as a fan of Bleach, it's really cool to see them incorporate something like that into the game here, where you still have the sword skills. They're constantly talking about like slant, horizontal, sonic leap, the usual sword skills from SAO that are also in the underworld. But now there's also these kind of commands based on the sword and how you use them. And as well as that, just the idea that they specifically say every divine weapon in the game is created from the core of a divine like object in the world. So Kirito's sword being made from the Gigas tree, his sword is divine because it comes from this legendary tree. And Yu-Gi-Oh's sword, the Blue Rose sword, is kind of almost implied. It's weird. I'd have to remember it exactly, but they sort of imply that it's basically made from a dragon, which are these legendary things that the Integrity Knights killed in the past. And that seems to be this kind of weird setup with I think what is either one of the first Integrity Knights, who is the kind of that hero character Yu-Gi-Oh kind of talks about, I think in the first book, Bertoli I think is his name, that he killed this knight with this and created this sword or something like that. I don't know the exact specifics, but it's something along those lines, where the Blue Rose sword is related to a dragon or something like that. There's a bigger story to it and why it's such an important sword. And then by the end of the book, we kind of find out that Alice's sword is made from basically the first tree, like the oldest object in the entire game, which I think is a really interesting reveal, that she's the newest Integrity Knight but has like the ultimate sword. And her sword, the release of it seems to be that it basically seems to be Byakuya Kuchiki's sword from Bleach, where like the blade like almost disappears and forms these tiny little kind of things that attack for her, and it has this huge wide-ranging effect. And then the other thing is that it's such a heavy sword, she has such a big advantage in the fight, which is very interesting because she hasn't had that much time to train, so the fact that she's so strong is a very interesting dynamic. But anyway, moving away from the first half of the story, the second half of the story revolves around basically Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh having escaped. They're in the tower. They have to get up to the top to get to Alice and Quinella. And it's basically just a bunch of different fights with Integrity Knights. They fight Integrity Knight number 7, whose name is Düsselbert, Synthesis 7. and he's got this kind of crazy bow that kind of turns into fire when he uses his kind of his enhancement on it, and they eventually manage to get the advantage over him, together, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh. Then they face the second synthesis knight, who is Thanatio Synthesis 2, and the big reveal is that it's actually revealed that this is a woman, because her helmet ends up flying off, and it's this big reveal. And she's a really interesting character because initially she's so confident and is dominating the fight initially, but once it's revealed that she's a woman, she kind of becomes a little bit on edge because she has this kind of issue with her own femininity. Like she feels like it being revealed that she's a woman to other people instantly lowers their view of her, and she doesn't like that at all. But Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh both don't have a problem with that, so it is this still very even fight. And of course it's the most brutal fight in the book because her weapon is this sword that fires these beams of lasers and just kind of cuts through people. So the way they talk about Kirito in the fight after this is that he's got a bunch of holes in him, basically, is the amount of damage he's taken. They say that they're basically pinpoints, but and they're not just massive huge holes you can actually properly see through, but that very clearly her attacks went through him like a kind of pin, and it's really interesting how they show it. And obviously the two have to use their enhanced armaments together to get the victory in this fight. And Kirito eventually finds such a connection with this character that he actually uses his knife on her to connect Cardinal to her so that she won't die. I don't know if they established that's that sword, that's that knife used up, or that he can use it again, but either way, he has helped this character he maybe didn't need to help. And it's why I feel like she should have been the character on the front of the book, because it really felt like they created a real arc around her, and that she's going to be healed by Cardinal. I could easily see her returning in one of the books down the line to help Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh for what they did, if she gets the reverse synthesis ritual done, but maintains her skill or somehow. That could be a very interesting reveal. The two characters in the front of the book, they basically just act as a duo of I think it's after they defeat the Integrity Knight 7, but before they encounter number 2. They go up the stairs basically and just encounter these two girls, and are just oh, what are you two doing here? They don't suspect anything because they're just two little girls. But they get poisoned. Both of them seemingly get poisoned. It's later revealed that Kirito saw this just about to happen and avoided it, but acted like he was poisoned, but then gets the advantage the second it looks like they're about to be done in for. And he uses the fact that he basically uses kind of, in a way, Thanatio as this example of just you two watch this fight with an actual honorable swordsman, and it will show you what you should be going forward, that you shouldn't be assassins and just focus on killing, that there's more to being a swordsman than just all of that. And it's not really said how much of an impact it really has on them, and that's why I don't think they really deserve to be on the cover, because they're fairly forgettable characters. They're like Integrity Knight, I think 28 and 29, but yeah, that's them. After that, I think there's a little bit of a gap, but no, they basically just head up the stairs after this. They go up an elevator, they meet the girl operating the elevator, and find out that she's been working that exact same job for 100 years or something like that. But when they get up to the top, they find Alice, and the reveal with her is that she's sleeping initially next to this tree. And the fight begins, and she doesn't have her sword. But then the second she actually gets into the fight, the tree just disappears and she has her sword. So it's this reveal that she has such control over her sword that she basically almost permanently has it in a released state. And whereas Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh both have to do these massively long chants of system commands to change their sword into the enhanced version, she seems to just be able to do it at will with her thoughts. And what happens here is that Kirito basically says that Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't think you'll be able to fight Alice properly because of how invested you are in her. So you just focus on, when you see an opportunity, stabbing her with the knife that will connect her to Cardinal. I'll do all the fighting. The problem is that he gets completely battered around the place because her sword is implied to be 10 times heavier than his, and while Kirito is skilled and doesn't get damaged by her attacks, He's sent flying every time he tries to attack her. She attacks him. There's just nothing that he can do as such. But some tricks begin to come into play here, where like he gets in close, he grabs onto her arm, Yu-Gi-Oh kind of activates his enhancement release, so they're all kind of contained by ice. But the big shift in the battle changes when Kirito uses his sword enhancement, and it's the idea of her sword enhancement, which is all the kind of specks of light versus the kind of branches of darkness, that creates this such a connection of power that it basically it seemingly destroys parts or the walls of the tower that they're on. And it seems like Kirito and Alice both get like sucked out basically once this happens. Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of left there on his own, and it's a complete cliffhanger at the end of the book where it's just like Kirito watches as like Kirito and Alice, Yu-Gi-Oh watches as Kirito and Alice are just kind of like they go missing basically, and that's it. We don't know what's happened or what the dynamic is going to be in the next book, but it seems like Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be now separated from Kirito, but that Kirito is going to be with Alice for the time being going forward. So that'll be very interesting to see where they go. I'm actually very intrigued by what they've done here, because Yu-Gi-Oh without Kirito, it feels like that's going to be a very interesting dynamic, because he's relied on Kirito a lot, and as much as there's been moments where he's shown to be like strong on his own, now in the middle of this tower on his own, how is he really going to do this? The other thing I think with Yu-Gi-Oh was that there were moments in the book where he felt like taking revenge against one of the Integrity Knights, because number 7, who they fight first, was the one who took Alice away in the first place, and when they defeat him, Kirito is about to like finish the job. Yu-Gi-Oh is about to finish the job, but Kirito actually talks him down from it. So it seems there's a little bit of rage, a little bit of anger, darkness, I suppose, potentially within Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't know if it's that big of an issue, but at least adds this extra layer to his character that makes him different than Kirito. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Volume 12 of Sword Art Online, Alicization Rising. An okay book. I think it's very on par with number 11, which I felt was, these two feel overall weaker than the first two parts of the arc of Volume 9 and 10. I think where it's going now that we have the reveal about like why Kirito's invested in this and so on is very, very interesting. I think the core now is about how you connect what's going on in the real world to here and so on. But yeah, that's been my thoughts on the book. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.